So, it turns out the fastest way to get new Boondocks is to leak some old Boondocks. As I'm sure most of you know by now, the official pilot short for the Boondocks was recently released online, and I definitely have some thoughts. First off, I just want to give a shout out to The Storyteller for putting the video on their channel. They make a lot of great Boondocks and Boondocks adjacent videos, and you should definitely check them out when you have a chance. But the point of this video was mostly just to talk about the pilot and analyze the differences and the similarities between this and the final product that we ended up getting. There's a lot to talk about in regards to sorting out the differences between this pilot and the final version of the show, but I think the biggest and most notable difference in the pilot is Huey. While the pilot version of Huey does share the final version of Huey's strong sense of justice, pro-black sensibilities, and combative nature with his brother Riley, pilot Huey is way more expressive, emotional, and straight-up childish than the Huey we've all come to know and love. A large part of what makes Huey funny in the final version of the show is just how mature and self-sufficient he is despite being a 10-year-old boy. Usually it would be Riley's immaturity that would cause a lot of the friction between him and Huey, but in this pilot, we see that Huey can be just as petty and argumentative as his little brother. Huey pouts and whines a lot more in this pilot than he ever did in the show, which, again, is exactly how a 10-year-old boy would act in a lot of these situations we see him in. I still prefer Regina King's version of Huey's voice, but I gotta say, I definitely don't hate whoever they got to do the original voice.
Read? You can't read and get hoes. Show me one person who reads and gets hoes.
I'm looking at one who don't read and don't got no hoes. Good night, player.
Well, yeah.
Huey in the final version of the show is supposed to be a stand-in or avatar for Aaron McGruder. And while that leads to a lot of great moments and clever writing concepts, it was really cool to see a different side or different possibility of what Huey could have been in this pilot. The final version of the Boondocks is a show that's very focused on being a scathing, social commentary about the issues of the world, especially regarding race. This pilot makes it seem like the original idea for the show was to be that more family and community-driven story with elements of social satire sprinkled in. To be fair, the latter feels more akin to what the OG comic strip was like that the show is based off of. Watching this pilot almost felt like I was watching some old cartoon on PBS or Disney Channel or something like that. Art to the music to the tone of the writing, it all just feels different. Not necessarily worse, but definitely different. And even though I'm glad that they made the stark change in artistic direction that they did, this pilot made me wonder what kind of show we could have gotten. And of course, staying forever diametrically opposed to Huey, Riley's character has no noticeable differences at all. Well, except his hair, but dear God, let's not ever talk about this again. Apparently, even Aaron McGruder hated Riley's milk dud head so much that he tried to put him in hats and hoods as much as possible back in the days of the show. Riley is still his same lovably obnoxious, thug-ass self, even down to Regina King still being his voice actor. It seems like the writers knew what Riley was supposed to be from the jump, and really, that kind of makes sense. I don't know how long it took them to add some of the other elements of his character, like his love of art or his deceptive intelligence, but he's pretty one-to-one when it comes to comparing the two versions of the show. You can say the same thing for Granddad, Tom, and Jasmine as well. From their voices to their personalities, everything is basically the same. There's some lines and jokes from the pilot that were put directly into various episodes of the final show, which is pretty cool to see.
Yo, hold up, man. You just stepped on my Air Force Ones. You blind fool?
Hold up! I smell new shoes!
Oh, me.
Oh, what you mean?
You pee the bed and suck your thumb. You are not a thug.
Remember when we used to sleep in the same bed when we was littler? From time to time, I'd have a little accident. You still do. Shut up!
Well, that kind of thing happens to everybody, honey. I remember kids would call me cornball or nerd. Or Oreo double stuff. Fruity boy, pansy pants, or bitch ass, or... That's right, Robert. Nobody's gonna call you a fruity boy or a pansy pants if you don't do this.
Sorry, Billy Blanks. But why buy the tape when you can get the infomercial for free? Sorry, Billy Blanks. But why buy the tape when you can get the infomercial for free? Whew.
Hell, if you lucky, they'll become rappers and get in some beef and do drive-bys on each other.
Well, I think that might be going a bit too far.
Y'all should just go be rappers, get into a beef, and then shoot each other.
The only thing that's changed about pilot Jasmine in comparison to final version Jasmine is that it seems like her and Huey were supposed to have some sort of crush on each other, which isn't that much of a change since it was kind of sort of hinted at throughout the final version of the show. But in this pilot, we see that even Granddad and Riley know about Huey having a crush on her, and they playfully mock him about it.
What about her?
He like her, but he's scared.
I'm not scared.
Don't be scared. Now you go out there and lay down your game, player.
The scene at the end of the pilot where Huey and Riley are locked up in detention, seemingly from protecting Jasmine from some bullies, and then Jasmine sneaking in to give Huey a sandwich was actually pretty sweet. And it's the kind of thing that I wish we could have gotten more of in the final version, but it's completely understandable why we didn't, considering the final version of Huey is drastically less emotional than the version of him in the pilot. The last major character to appear in the pilot is Uncle Ruckus, and while he's still his same low-life, black-hating, black man self, he seems less over the top in the pilot version than he does in the final version. For one, he doesn't really have his iconic glass eye, or at least it's way less noticeable in the pilot. Two, he doesn't mention having revitiligo or anything that would suggest that he doesn't realize that he's a fully black man. And three, he actually mentions having his own black children, who he purposely abandoned, I should add, meaning at some point in his adult life, he decided that he hated black people instead of always being raised to think less of them like in the final version. I think this version of Ruckus could have been really great as well, but he definitely just seems like a less fleshed out and less hilarious version of the Uncle Ruckus that we got in the final version. Ruckus is an absurd character at his core, so I feel like whatever version of him is more absurd is definitively the better version of Ruckus. All in all, I really like this pilot. If this is what the networks like Adult Swim saw that got the Boondocks greenlit for its first season, then it makes all the sense in the world why. But this pilot really made me think about the what ifs, the potential paths that the Boondocks could have gone down if just a couple of creative changes were made or were not made. Like, what if the show kept all of its creative decisions from this pilot? Would it have become the same smash hit success that it did? Or would it have flopped after its first season and fell into irrelevance and obscurity? Maybe it would have become even more successful and beloved than the final version of the show that we did get. These are questions that we'll never really have answers to, but as you know, it's fun to dream. You might be surprised how many great shows and movies were only a few last-second creative changes away from being average or just straight up terrible. There's often a fine line between good art and terrible art, and even outside of artistic endeavors, succeeding in life often comes down to a few major decisions that either make or break you. And sure, it can be a little overwhelming at times living with that truth, but you shouldn't let that deter you from making important decisions and changing certain aspects of your life when the moment calls for it. Very rarely have decisions made out of fear resulted in success. So whatever you choose to do, make sure that choice comes from a belief and knowledge of yourself and your true capabilities. And don't let one failure stop you from finding redemption. And conversely, don't allow any small progress to make you content with staying where you're at. This Boondocks pilot was pretty good, but it was just the springboard and the foundation for something that was much greater. Always remember that you're capable of more.